A well-researched documentary has the power to change a national conversation overnight, and that is precisely what happened when an in-depth film about Tanzania's 2025 election exposed a wave of events the world had not seen. The production assembled eyewitness testimony, mobile footage from the streets, and geolocated satellite imagery to build a sustained, verifiable picture of what many had only whispered about. What emerges is not a single incident but a pattern. Crowds dispersed with excessive force, families left without answers, and burial sites that raise urgent questions about accountability. The impact was immediate. What had been framed domestically as isolated unrest became, on the international stage, a human rights emergency demanding scrutiny. The documentary's investigators did more than gather headlines. They mapped scenes, matched timestamps, and verified locations. They interviewed relatives who described clandestine burials and forced omissions from hospital records. They obtained clips showing security personnel firing live rounds at protesters who had come into the streets to demand transparent elections. Satellite analysis revealed recently disturbed earth near military facilities consistent with mass internments. These converging lines of evidence made the film's claims difficult to dismiss as rumor or partisan exaggeration. And that is why the material struck such a chord globally. For Tanzania's leadership, the fallout was acute. The head of state, who had cultivated an image as a reformer when first assuming office, reacted with visible anger and alarm. The film did not merely criticize policy. It implicated elements of the security apparatus and cast doubt on official explanations for disappearances and deaths. That exposure rapidly shifted public perception abroad and at home. Foreign partners, investors, and human rights bodies began to demand clarity. Tourism bookings and investor sentiment showed immediate strain. Within political circles, allies and opponents alike began to recalculate how to position themselves. Amid mounting international pressure. To understand the scale of the crisis, it is necessary to recall the events that led there. In the run-up to the election, restrictions on opposition campaigning and public assemblies tightened. Prominent opposition figures were detained or barred from contesting, and several parties reported systematic obstacles to their participation. On polling days and in the aftermath, the internet was shut down intermittently, a blackout that silenced real-time reporting and prevented citizens from coordinating or documenting abuses. Official tallies presented overwhelming support for the incumbent. Independent observers and many citizens contested the credibility of those results. Public demonstrations that followed were large and diverse, and initially peaceful until security forces intervened with escalating force. The film's accounts of crowd control include distressing detail. Tear gas and baton charges gave way to live ammunition in multiple locations. According to verified footage and hospital logs, medical personnel described sudden influxes of gunshot wounds and patients arriving with injuries inconsistent with non-lethal crowd control. Families described being pressured into silent burials or denied access to remains. Where documentary investigators applied satellite and forensic tools, they identified sites of freshly turned soil in proximity to military compounds, a finding that raised urgent questions about detention, transfer, and internment practices. Those findings reframed the narrative of the election from contested politics to a rights crisis. International institutions responded. Regional and global bodies called for independent inquiries, even as some states initially expressed caution, balancing economic ties and geopolitical calculations. Multilateral organizations signaled concern about rule of law erosion and urged transparent, impartial investigations. The diplomatic fallout included threats of sanctions, freezes on new investment, and public statements from allied capitals pressing for accountability. The resulting pressure further isolated the administration and intensified domestic debate over governance and legitimacy. Domestically, the consequences were immediate and painful for ordinary citizens. Tourism-dependent businesses reported cancellations. Border commerce slowed, and confidence in public institutions deteriorated. Families searching for missing relatives encountered opaque coordination among security, health, and local authorities. journalists and civil society actors who attempted to document or protest the abuses reported intimidation, arrests, and, in some cases, disappearance. A climate of fear settled over many communities. People self-censored and public gatherings dwindled. At the same time, the documentary gave new voice to victims and emboldened activists who had been working quietly. To push for inquiries and redress, the political cost for the president and her governing party was not only reputational. Internally, pressure mounted from political allies who worried about economic impacts and the possibility of legal exposure. Externally, partner governments and multilateral lenders signaled that continued engagement would hinge on transparent investigations and credible steps to restore civic freedoms. The leaders' options narrowed: a conciliatory path of independent inquiry, cooperation with international mechanisms and legal accountability, or a confrontational path of suppression and defensiveness that risks further isolation and domestic instability. The months that followed would determine whether the country could repair institutional trust or accelerate into deeper crisis. Beyond the immediate facts of the film, the episode has broader implications for journalism and civic oversight across the continent. The documentary demonstrated how modern investigative techniques, open-source verification, cross-referencing of video evidence, and satellite imagery can pierce intentional silences. In contexts where traditional press freedoms are constrained, these tools allow local testimonies to be corroborated in ways that are harder to dismiss. That capability strengthens citizens' capacity to demand redress and increases the international community's ability to assess claims independently. The documentary also provoked a visceral reaction among Africans watching. From other countries, many saw in Tanzania's events a pattern they knew too well: elections marred by restrictions, protesters met with excessive force, and institutions that failed to provide transparent answers. For activists and civil society groups across the continent, the film became both a warning and a call to safeguard democratic norms and accountability mechanisms at home. At the heart of the unfolding story are the families who lost loved ones and the communities coping with trauma and unanswered questions. For them, the international attention offers a slim hope for accountability and for the truth to be officially documented. For the nation, it is a pivotal moment, whether it responds with genuine investigation and reform, or with continued opacity and repression, will shape its political trajectory and regional standing. In the final analysis, the documentary did what journalism is meant to do. It brought previously hidden facts into public view and forced a conversation about power, responsibility, and justice. What follows depends on whether institutions, domestic, regional, and international, can translate the film's revelations into impartial investigations, legal accountability, and meaningful reforms that restore citizens' trust. For now, the film remains a stark reminder that transparency matters, that accountability cannot be deferred indefinitely, and that when governments fall short, independent reporting can become the catalyst for truth.